Why did she still wake up before dawn, when there was no mission left to fight? Didn't know anymore. The habit was just part of her bones now. Before sunrise, before the rest of North Carolina exhaled its first breath of morning, she'd already be out there, running. 10 miles. Sometimes 12. Not for fitness, not for pride, just to keep her head quiet. That morning the air outside her small cabin near camp was thick with the smell of pine and dew. The gravel crunched under her running shoes. Every few strides she caught the distant sound of waves from the Carolina coast. The rhythm kept her steady. Left, right, breathe, don't think. But you can't outrun memory. When she returned, sweat-soaked and breathing steady, the first rays of sunlight stretched through the trees, touching the porch where an old jacket hung from a chair. The sleeves were rolled up, and beneath the fabric faint scars crossed her forearms, thin, pale lines that didn't come from accidents. Most people never noticed. The ones who did never asked. To her neighbors, she was just the quiet woman down the road. Former military, maybe, always polite, worked remotely for some logistics firm. Nobody knew she once held lives in her scope, that she could read wind like a second language, that she'd spent nights staring through crosshairs at faces she never wanted to remember. They thought she liked solitude. Truth was, she'd never really left the jungle. Some nights when the humidity pressed heavy against the cabin walls, could still smell it, the sour sweetness of rot, the damp green of a place that never stopped breathing. The jungle didn't let you forget. It just waited in the dark, patient, alive. And sometimes she thought it was still watching her. She joined the Marines at 19, straight out of a small Montana ranch where winters were brutal and emotions were luxuries. Out there, survival didn't care about how you felt. Her grandfather used to tell her, "I'll save your life, girl. Out here you move when it's time, not when you feel like it." He taught her to shoot before she could reach the top of a fence post. A Remington 700 wood worn smooth by years of work. By 15, she could hit a prairie dog at 400 yards without blinking. Wind, distance, breath, those were just math problems to her. And she loved the math. The Corps noticed. They tested her, pushed her, broke her down until she either quit or became something sharper, didn't quit. She made it through the Scout sniper pipeline at 22, top 15% of her class, but she didn't celebrate because the joke started right after, the looks. She's too small. She won't make it through the field course. She looks like she should be teaching yoga, not spotting targets. She never argued. She smiled, trained harder, and outshot half of them. Quiet humiliation was fuel. It burned slow, steady, efficient. By her second deployment, she had over 60 confirmed engagements, most between 300 and 600 meters. She didn't talk about them. She didn't need to. The people who knew didn't ask, and the people who didn't, well, they just kept talking. But all of that was years ago. Now she sat on that porch with coffee that had gone cold and the faint hiss of summer rain beginning to fall, and she thought about that mission, the one no one in her company debrief ever really talked about. Yep. The name still made her stomach twist. Officially, it was Operation Extraction, an easy pull-and-go assignment in the Philippines. Civilian engineers stuck in the wrong place when the security contract fell apart. Simple extraction. It wasn't supposed to turn into a fight. It wasn't supposed to test her patience, her loyalty, or her will to disobey an order. But missions rarely ask for permission before falling apart. She'd been assigned Overwatch, standard for her skill set. A private military contract, mixed ex-military crew, 2 for insertion and extraction. Their leader, a former Marine named, made his opinion clear the first time he looked at her across the mission table. "You'll stay at the rally point," he'd said. "We've got the assault handled." He didn't even try to sound respectful. The room was silent except for the buzz of the overhead light. His voice was calm, but his eyes said something else, something sharp and dismissive. "The contract says we need a sniper," he added with a smirk. "Doesn't say it has to be you." A few of the others laughed quietly. Didn't. She just nodded and kept writing her notes. She learned that arguing only fed the fire. The last thing men like respected was pushback from someone they'd already decided didn't belong. "Copy that," she said simply, closing her notebook. But that night when she checked her rifle, a custom M40A5 with hand-loaded 175-grain rounds, she knew something he didn't. The jungle didn't care who believed in you. It only cared who survived it. The infill went smoothly, two slicing through thick tropical clouds, rotors chopping the humid air like blades through syrup. They touched down 6 kilometers out from the target compound. The team split, leading 8 men toward the engineers, left behind with the comms operator and a security specialist named. "Keep the LZ clean," said before moving out. "We'll call when it's showtime." Gave a 2-finger salute. "Roger that." She set up on high ground 400 meters from the landing zone, a clean vantage with an unbroken view of the valley below. Perfect line of sight, perfect distance, patience territory. The security guy was barely 23, fresh out of the army, shaky trigger discipline, still thought a clean rifle meant he'd done his job. He tried to talk, make small jokes, but wasn't in the mood. He ended up scrolling on his phone, muttering about home. She half listened, half watched the jungle. It was too quiet. She'd been in enough green zones to know, when the birds stop, trouble starts. 90 minutes later, his voice cracked through the radio, calm at first, then clipped. "Contact, heavy contact. Multiple hostiles, compound perimeter breached." Her pulse stayed steady. She flattened against the forest floor, one eye on her scope, scanning shadows for movement. Then came the background sounds: gunfire, the thump of grenades, shouts overlapping. The calm broke fast. "Extraction compromised," shouted through static. "Repeat, compromised. Hostiles surrounding the compound." The comms operator beside her panicked. "What do we do? Should we move? Should we?" Quiet whispered, "Listen." She could hear it, the chaos breathing through the trees, a war orchestra, but she couldn't see it yet. Not clearly, not enough to act. She thought about her first deployment, the one where she'd listened to her sergeant tell her to hold position. She obeyed. 2 men died. She could still see their faces sometimes, right before sleep. And she remembered promising herself one thing that day: never again. She adjusted her scope, wind moving from east to west, around 8 knots. She mentally mapped every line of sight, every elevation change, every place a rifle could sing from. Her jaw tightened. Came back on the radio, angry, desperate. "Hold your position. We don't need interference. You'll just complicate." Static swallowed his voice. The comms operator looked at her. "What now?" Didn't answer. She thought of her grandfather again, waiting out Montana storms in silence, only moving when the wind changed. Patience isn't doing nothing. It's knowing when to move. She checked her rifle one last time, locked her magazine and stood. "Grab your pack," she told. He blinked. "What, we're supposed to?" "We're moving." The jungle greeted her with open hostility. Every vine clawed at her gear. Every root tried to trip her. The air was thick enough to drink and every breath burned. But she didn't stop. She was 400 meters away from hell, and that was close enough to help. It took her 40 minutes to climb the ridge. By then, her uniform was soaked, her hair stuck to her neck, and her muscles trembled from the incline. But when she reached the top, she could see everything. The compound below looked like something torn from a nightmare, concrete buildings half swallowed by jungle, muzzle flashes lighting up the tree line. His team was trapped inside one structure. The engineers huddled behind overturned tables and broken walls. At least 20 hostiles surrounded them, moving in arcs, closing in tight. And on the north side, a machine gun nest spat fire at the building's windows, non-stop suppression. Lay flat behind a fallen log, heart steady, lungs working slow. She ranged the target, 540 meters, whined steady at 10 knots. She could feel the rhythm of it. She exhaled. The first shot broke the jungle's silence like thunder. The gunner dropped instantly. She didn't wait to celebrate. Shifted, rearranged, second shot. The assistant gunner fell backward into ferns. The hostiles froze, confused, trying to spot where the death was coming from. Shifted 15 meters left, crawling through damp leaves. Moved, fired, moved again. Every breath was a calculation, every second a decision. She became invisible. Below, chaos turned to confusion. The suppressive fire thinned, then stopped altogether. His voice crackled over the radio, disbelief and relief tangled together. Who the hell's firing out there? Didn't answer. She just loaded another round and looked through the glass again. Her hands were steady, her breathing slow. This was where she belonged. Not behind a desk, not in silence. But here, where every decision meant someone lived or didn't. She squeezed the trigger again. The jungle echoed her choice. How long could one heartbeat hold back a war? Didn't know. But up on that ridge, with her finger resting gently on the trigger and her pulse beating steady in her ears, she knew one thing. If she stopped now, men would die. Her radio hissed with fractured noise, panic, confusion, someone shouting for a medic. She tuned it out. The world narrowed to her scope, her breath, her rifle's quiet rhythm. Everything else, fear, exhaustion, doubt, fell away. Down below, the firefight had shifted. The insurgents weren't charging anymore. They were crawling, flanking, trying to guess where she was. She watched one of them through the crosshairs, moving low behind a fallen water tank. He raised his rifle, hesitation, then fire. The muzzle flash glowed faintly. She waited, one breath, two. Then squeezed. The man collapsed into the mud. Contact eliminated, she whispered, not into the radio but to herself. Old habits die hard. Through her scope, she saw movement again. 3 figures dragging someone wounded through the compound gate. She couldn't make out who. The man's arm dangled unnaturally, limp, blood painting his sleeve. Another contractor fired blind toward the tree line, desperate suppression. Shifted her aim, tracking. The air shimmered with heat mirage, distorting shapes. A rifle barrel, a glint of metal. She held her breath, counted wind drift in her head, and fired again. One fell, the others froze. For a second she thought of their faces, people she didn't know, people with homes, maybe families. But that thought had no place here. Not now. Not while others were counting on her to stay cold. Still, something inside her twisted. She remembered Afghanistan. The day her spotter had asked her after a clean hit, "You ever think about who they were?" And she'd said, "No, do you?" He'd smiled sadly, "All the time." She hadn't slept that night. Now, years later, the same question whispered through her mind, soft but cutting. Who were they? She pushed it away, calculated windage again. The jungle roared alive around her, birds startled by gunfire, distant echoes bouncing between trees. The rain had started, a slow drizzle turning the ground slick beneath her elbows. Every drop hitting her rifle felt like a countdown. She shifted positions, crawling along the ridge to a new angle. Mud clung to her gloves, her boots heavy with water. She could smell the earth now, rich and alive, mixed with cordite and decay. The jungle didn't care about sides, it just consumed whatever fell into it. Her radio came alive again, voice ragged through static. "This is anyone with Overwatch. We're pinned at the west wall. Multiple hostiles. Need suppressive cover now." Pressed the mic to her mouth, breath steady. "Copy. West wall visual confirmed." She caught sight of them, 6 men and 3 civilians huddled behind a half-collapsed concrete wall. Bullets chewed through the above their heads. Was crouched near the corner, firing short bursts. One of the engineers was bleeding heavily from the leg, a tourniquet half-tied and soaked. Switched to her alternate angle, found the source. 4 insurgents, elevated behind a rusted truck chassis, using it as cover. 540 meters. Crosswind shifting right 10 knots. She adjusted, exhaled, squeezed. First target down. The next shot followed half a breath later. Second man hit, rolled. She didn't stop to watch him fall. Third shot, fourth. The rifle kicked gently, predictable, familiar. Her breathing matched the rhythm, inhale, exhale, fire. Below, the firing from the enemy side stuttered, then went quiet. His voice came again, louder, panting. "Whoever the hell's up there, keep it coming. You're clearing us a window." She almost laughed, almost. Instead, she whispered to herself, "You should trusted me sooner." The next minutes blurred. The team regrouped, moved wounded to the center, checked ammo, kept her eyes on the perimeter, scanning. The insurgents weren't done, they never were. They were waiting, testing. She found one moving along the tree line, low and cautious. The man paused, raised binoculars, scanning toward her ridge. She froze. If he spotted her, her position was compromised. He didn't. He turned, whispered to someone unseen. A second figure emerged, carrying something heavier, tube-shaped, RPG. Her pulse quickened. "RPG North Ridge," she hissed into the radio. "Recommend immediate suppression." "Negative," replied. "No eyes on." She didn't wait. The man raised the launcher to his shoulder. She fired. The round caught him mid-movement. He crumpled. The rocket slipped, detonating harmlessly against the ground. The echo rolled like thunder through the valley. The shockwave pushed humid air into her face. She blinked through it, checking her sights again. No more visible movement, for now. "Target neutralized," she said. His voice this time almost human. "That you?" She didn't respond. Silence was better. She needed him focused, not second-guessing. Through the scope, she could see the engineers again, one crying quietly while another held a pressure dressing to a wounded friend. The medics moved fast, methodical, stopped the bleed, airway, breathing. Could almost hear the cadence in her head, TCCC drilled deep into muscle memory. But she couldn't help everyone. She had to stay on the scope, because if she blinked, one of them might not see the next minute. The rain thickened. Visibility dropped. Every droplet felt like static on her skin. Her body ached from holding still so long, but she couldn't shift, not yet. She scanned her sectors again, rechecked her dope card, adjusted for elevation. The rifle was part of her now, an extension, a lifeline. Then she heard it, movement behind her, a faint crack of twig, close. She froze. The jungle was wide, but sound carried strangely here. It could be, or it could be someone else. She risked a glance over her shoulder. Nothing visible, just trees. She waited, listened. Then a shadow, human-sized 20 meters back, moving slow. Her breath caught. She turned, steady hands raising her sidearm, low and ready. The figure froze mid-step, then whispered harshly, "It's me." She exhaled slowly, lowering the weapon. "You're late," she said quietly. "Got turned around," he muttered, wiping rain from his face. "Couldn't find your position. What's the sitrep?" "Bad," she said simply, "but manageable." He crouched beside her, squinting through the rain. "You've been doing all this." She didn't answer. The question didn't need one. He shook his head. "Ma'am, remind me never to piss you off." A faint smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. It was gone just as fast. Below, the gunfire started again. Heavier this time, multiple directions. The insurgents were regrouping. She could hear their voices faintly now, shouting over the storm. They were spreading wide, maybe 40 strong. Swore under his breath, "They're not pulling back." "They won't," said. "Not until someone gives them a reason to." She slid the bolt, chambered another round. Her gloves were soaked. The action stuck slightly, but she forced it clean. "Set up your carbine," she ordered. "Watch our flank. 60-degree arc behind us. If they find this ridge, we're done." Obeyed quickly. No more jokes now. Just breathing and the mechanical click of preparation. Refocused through her scope. The rain softened, visibility improving slightly. Through the murky haze she caught motion, dozens of them now advancing cautiously using cover. They'd learned. No easy shots this time. "Here they come," she whispered. She started firing again, measured, calm, every round purposeful, every target a calculation. The rifle bucked softly in her shoulder, rain splashing from the stock. Fired bursts behind her, short, disciplined. She could hear him counting under his breath. But there were too many. The radio erupted again, chaotic voices, mixed reports, fragments of panic. The engineers were almost ready for extraction, but the choppers couldn't come in hot, not with RPGs still out there. His jaw clenched. She felt the old burn in her chest, the same one she'd carried since Afghanistan, that helpless, gnawing ache that said you're the only one who can fix this. And maybe she was. She switched mags, checked the chamber, wiped water from her scope. The next shot cracked through the rain, then another. Each target she dropped bought the others seconds, just seconds, but seconds meant life. His voice came through again, strained. "We're pulling back toward the LZ. Can you cover our movement?" She pressed her radio. "Copy. I'll guide you out, move on my mark." She scanned plotted their path mentally. The jungle was a labyrinth of death traps, roots, ditches, lines of fire. But she saw it, a narrow path under the east ridge that could shield them from the worst of the enemy line. "Go now," she said. "Stay low, don't stop." The team moved, shadows darting through trees, fired over their heads, suppressing, covered the rear. Then came the worst sound, the one she'd been waiting for and dreading. A distant whine, rising fast. "Mortar," she hissed. She slammed her body flat as the explosion ripped the earth 50 meters downslope. The shockwave hit like a fist, mud and leaves raining down. Shouted something half heard. Her ears rang, the jungle screamed. Another round hit closer. They'd found her position. For a split second fear surged, raw, electric. Then training took over. She grabbed her rifle, rolled left, and started crawling downhill. Every muscle screamed. Every nerve told her to run. But she moved steady, deliberate. No panic. The third mortar hit behind her. Fire, heat, smoke. She reached a small depression in the ground and slid into it, chest heaving. Her hands trembled. She waited, listened. The jungle fell silent again. Smoke drifted through the trees like ghosts. She exhaled, slow, controlled. Her heart still pounded, but she was alive. A voice crackled faintly through the comms. "You good?" She swallowed hard, still here. Then quieter, more to herself than anyone. "You'll have to try harder than that." The rain fell heavier again, washing smoke into the soil. The gunfire faded as the contractors moved farther toward the LZ. Looked through her scope one last time. Nothing but empty jungle and the echoes of what had just happened. Her rifle steamed in the rain. Her breath came out in shudders. She lay there for a long time, motionless, until her heartbeat finally slowed. The war had moved downhill, but the storm was far from over. How much weight can silence carry before it breaks? The jungle answered with rain, heavy, relentless. It poured down her helmet, dripping from the brim in rhythmic trails. Lay in the shallow depression, half buried in mud, rifle pressed tight against her shoulder. The smell of cordite still lingered, metallic, sharp. Beneath it, rot and moss. Life and death sharing the same breath. The mortars had stopped, for now. But she knew better than to trust quiet. Quiet was the sound of reloads. Through the thin veil of rain she caught glimpses of motion, shadows weaving among the trees. No muzzle flashes yet, but they were coming. She checked her scope, glass fogged slightly from the humidity, wiped it clean with the back of her glove. The reticle came into focus again, her anchor, her control. She keyed her radio, status. A pause, then static, and his voice strained. "We're 2 clicks from the LZ. Heavy load, 3 stretchers. Can't move fast, we'll need a corridor." "Copy," she said softly. "I'll keep your path clear." She didn't add the part about being almost out of ammo. Only one magazine left in her chest rig, another half empty in the rifle. 40 rounds, give or take. 40 chances to buy them another minute. Crouched beside her, soaked, shivering. "They're moving on us," he whispered. "You hear that?" She nodded. "They think they pinned us." They kind of did. Not yet. She adjusted her bipod, rotated slightly to the left, and sighted down toward a group of figures advancing low through the underbrush. She could see their silhouettes now, 8, maybe 9. Insurgents. Bare feet, dark uniforms, wet rifles. Moving slow, disciplined. They'd learned. She lined up her shot. Wind calm. Range 410 meters. The air was thick, heavy enough that her breath felt visible. She inhaled, let it out, and squeezed. The first man dropped. His comrades froze, diving for cover. Another leaned to drag him back. She fired again. 2 rounds, one target down. One missed by inches, maybe less. She cursed quietly, adjusted, and fired once more. The man folded into the mud. Whispered, "Holy." "Focus," she cut him off. "They'll flank right." He nodded quickly, eyes wide. "Copy." They worked in rhythm now. She shoot, he'd shift, cover, reload. It wasn't rehearsed. It was instinct. The rain drowned out their words, but not their trust. It was strange. She barely knew the kid, but in this chaos, he was the only thing between her and isolation. Minutes passed like hours. The insurgents pressed harder, probing, testing her angles. She dropped another one, then another. But for every one she stopped, 2 more replaced them. Her rifle clicked empty. She ejected the magazine, hands slick, cold, trembling, not from fear but fatigue. Her arms felt like stone, every motion deliberate, mechanical. She loaded her final mag, closed the bolt, and whispered under her breath, "Don't let me miss." She spotted movement at her far right, too close, a shape breaking the brush. "Right flank." He swung his carbine, fired 3 bursts. A body crashed through leaves, rolled downhill. Adjusted left again, picked off another advancing figure. The jungle was chaos, thick, shifting shapes, half glimpses of death between trees. She didn't think, just reacted. Every breath a trigger pull, every heartbeat a calculation. Then silence again. Just rain and the faint hum of distant rotor blades. Her head lifted slightly. "Say again, you have air support inbound." "Affirmative," his voice came, cutting through static. "Birds are spinning up, 5 minutes out. We'll be at the LZ in 3. Hold them off till then." 5 minutes. Exhaled. 5 minutes could feel like a lifetime. She crawled to the edge of the ridge, peering down into the ravine where she knew the insurgents would regroup. Her scope found them. 24 now, maybe more, gathering behind fallen logs, gesturing toward her position. They weren't retreating. They were preparing. A coordinated push. "Saw it too. They're coming, ma'am." His voice shook. Looked at him. Mud streaked his face, his hair plastered to his forehead, eyes bright with fear, but still steady. "You hold fire until I say," she told him. He nodded, gripping his carbine tight. She checked her rifle again. 10 rounds left, maybe 12. Down below, the enemy commander raised his hand, a signal. Dozens of voices shouted at once, then the jungle erupted. Gunfire tore through the air. The ridge exploded with splinters as bullets shredded bark. Pressed flat, dirt spraying across her face. The noise was deafening. "Wait," she whispered, "wait." Was shaking beside her, eyes darting. "Now." She popped up just enough to sight in. Fired 3 times in rapid succession. 1, 2, 3. Each shot a scream in the storm. She ducked, shifted left, fired again. Return fire rained down. Leaves shredded. A round struck the dirt inches from her face. She rolled, came up in a new spot, shot again. Her body was on autopilot now, mind silent, muscles remembering what they'd been trained to do. Move, aim, fire, breathe. The assault lasted maybe 30 seconds, maybe 30 years. Then the gunfire faded. The survivors retreated deeper into the green. The rain swallowed the sound. His breathing was ragged. Her shoulder throbbed from recoil. She felt the world tilt slightly, the kind of exhaustion that comes when adrenaline starts to bleed out. Checked his mag, half empty. I think that's all of them. She shook her head. It's never all of them. Her radio crackled. Birds inbound, 90 seconds. She glanced down the ridge toward the clearing that served as the extraction zone. Through the trees, she could see faint light, rotor wash kicking up mist. Relief almost hurt. "Let's move," she said, slinging her rifle. They half slid, half ran down the muddy slope, branches whipping at their faces. Legs burned, lungs raw, but she didn't slow. They broke through the last line of brush just as the descended, massive, deafening, godlike in the rain. His team emerged from the tree line opposite, carrying stretchers, limping, shouting over the rotors, and took positions at the perimeter, rifles ready. The first helicopter touched down. Medics jumped out, grabbing the wounded, shouting coordinates. The second hovered above, providing overwatch. His heart pounded. Every sound, every motion was heightened. This was the final stretch, the most dangerous moment of any mission. Then came the inevitable. Gunfire from the east ridge. "Contact," shouted. Spun, sighted through the storm. She couldn't see them clearly, just flashes. Muzzle bursts, quick, bright. She fired. 1, 2, 3. A scream answered somewhere unseen. The pilots pushed the throttles. The first lifted, blades shredding rain into mist. The downwash tore through the jungle, bending trees. The second bird swung into land. "Go, go," yelled, waving the remaining engineers aboard. Stayed where she was, firing between bursts, covering, counting every last shot. Her rifle clicked dry on the last round. She switched to her sidearm, firing controlled bursts until the final man was aboard. Then she heard the call, "All loaded." She ran for the helicopter, boots sinking deep in mud, covered her flank, firing behind them. They dove through the open side door just as it lifted off. The roar swallowed everything. Through the open bay, could see the ridge receding, the jungle still alive, still breathing, still hungry. She didn't feel triumph, just silence, and the hum of the rotors. Sat across from her, helmet off, face streaked with grime and disbelief. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he leaned forward slightly. "That was you, wasn't it, up on the ridge?" Didn't look at him. "Did what I was paid to do." He nodded slowly, eyes distant. "You saved us." She didn't respond. The words didn't feel real. They never did. When the helicopters touched down at the forward base, chaos took over again. Medics, officers, radios. People moving fast, voices layered. Stepped off quietly, slung her rifle, and walked toward the far edge of the tarmac. The rain had eased to a drizzle. She looked back once. The stretchers, the bandaged hands, the faces. Every one of them alive. That should felt like enough. But it didn't, because she couldn't stop thinking about the others, the ones who hadn't made it, the ones she'd put down through the scope, the ones she'd never know by name. War didn't care about names. It just tallied balance sheets of breath and silence. When the debrief started hours later, she sat across from in a small room that smelled of coffee and gun oil. A single bulb flickered overhead. The company's legal officer and project manager were there too, reading notes, asking questions. 23 confirmed hostiles neutralized, the officer said, all attributed to precision long-range fire from an elevated position west of the compound. Looked at for a long time. Then he said quietly that position was hers. The officer blinked. "Sergeant." "Yeah." There was a pause, then nods, then silence. Her promotion came through later that week. Pay grade up, clearance level up. Her name quietly moved from support contractor to primary Overwatch asset. The one who'd once joked about her size bought her a beer in the Manila hotel bar that night. He didn't say sorry. He didn't need to. The look said enough. nodded to her from across the room, his pride tempered with something deeper, respect, maybe guilt. She wasn't sure. She drank half the beer, set it down, and left. Outside, the city lights bled into the rain. The sound of traffic, laughter, music, normal life felt too distant, too clean. She breathed in, slow and heavy, and closed her eyes. For the first time in days, the silence didn't feel like a threat. It felt like proof. Proof she was still here. And somewhere deep inside, a whisper, "You did what you had to." But even then, she knew, some debts don't wash off, no matter how much rain falls. How do you come home from a place that never let you leave? Didn't have an answer. The flight back from Manila was long, half-empty, filled with the dull hum of engines and the kind of silence that eats at thought. She stared out the window, watching clouds slide by like smoke, and tried not to replay what had happened in the jungle. But memory doesn't take orders. It moves on its own, uninvited, unstoppable. Every flash of lightning outside the window looked like gunfire. Every vibration in the fuselage felt like rotor wash. Even sleep didn't help. The moment she closed her eyes, she could smell it again. The wet earth, the burned cordite, the metallic taste of blood in the air. When the plane landed in North Carolina, she didn't feel relief, just emptiness. At the baggage claim, no one waited for her. She hadn't told anyone she was coming back. She left quietly, and she returned the same way, quiet, unnoticed, invisible. It was easier that way. She drove from the airport with the windows down. The humid Carolina air hit her face, thick with pine and salt from the coast. It was almost the same humidity as the jungle, just cleaner, less cruel. Her cabin sat miles from town, wooden porch, gravel driveway, the same place she'd left before deployment. The key turned easily in the lock, but the house felt different, smaller somehow. She set her rifle case by the door, dropped her duffel beside it, and stood there for a long moment, just listening. No helicopters, no static, no gunfire, just cicadas and wind. She thought that would feel peaceful. It didn't. Peace is strange when you've forgotten how to live in it. The first few days blurred together. Mornings were quiet, runs before sunrise, coffee black and silent. She'd work remotely for a few hours, contract analysis, paperwork for logistics firms that never asked about her past. Then she'd sit on the porch until dusk, watching the light fade between the trees. From the outside, it looked like rest. On the inside, it felt like waiting. Sometimes she'd catch herself scanning the tree line out of habit, counting angles, spotting high ground. Once, she heard a car backfire on the highway and instinctively dropped her mug. Coffee splashed across the porch boards. Her heart raced for a full minute before it slowed. The body remembers what the mind tries to forget. She told herself she'd decompress. That was the word they used in debriefs. Decompression, period. Like she was surfacing too fast from deep water, like time on land would equalize the pressure. But every night when the humidity thickened, it pulled her back to the jungle, back to that ridge. She'd see it again, through her own scope, slow motion, the faces, the rain, the breath between shots. Sometimes she saw the people she saved, sometimes the ones she didn't. And she'd wake up drenched in sweat, pulse hammering, the echoes of gunfire fading only when dawn started bleeding into the horizon. She stopped trying to sleep much after that. Instead, she'd go running, 10 miles, sometimes 12. The rhythm helped. The burn in her lungs made her feel real again. Pain had always been easier to manage than memory. One morning, about a week after coming home, she found herself sitting on her porch in the same jacket she'd worn for years, faded, sleeves rolled, scars showing faintly beneath. The coffee had gone cold again, untouched. Across the street, her neighbor, a retired Marine named, was mowing his lawn. He waved. She raised her cup, half a nod. Neither said a word. Veterans had a language of silence. Sometimes it said more than any conversation. Later that day, she drove into town for supplies. The grocery store cashier smiled politely, asked how her day was, said, "Fine." The lie rolled off easily. People didn't really want the truth. They wanted comfort, and she couldn't give that, not anymore. On the way out, she passed a newspaper stand. The headline on one of the papers caught her eye: "Private Security Team Rescues American Engineers Amid Hostile Conflict in Southeast Asia." No names, no photos, just a story. She stared at it for a long moment, then walked away. It didn't bother her that no one would know her name. The opposite, actually. It comforted her. Heroes were stories people told to make sense of things, but she'd seen what heroism looked like up close, and it wasn't clean. It wasn't noble. It was mud and fear and doing what had to be done when every other option was gone. She didn't need to be remembered. She just needed to forget. That night she sat outside again as rain started to fall. North Carolina rain was softer than jungle rain. It didn't hammer, it whispered. She leaned back in her chair, let the drops hit her face, and for a moment she almost relaxed. But then she caught the scent, the same damp, earthy smell that lived in her memory, and suddenly she was there again. Lying in the mud, finger on the trigger, shouting something behind her she couldn't quite hear. The world exploding around them. She opened her eyes fast. The rain had stopped. The porch light flickered once, then went dark. Her hands were shaking. She stared at them, flexed them slowly. "You're not there," she whispered. "You're here." Sometimes that was the hardest truth to believe. Days became weeks. The nightmares eased, not because they went away, but because she learned to live with them. They were part of the deal now. You don't get to walk through hell and come out spotless. You just learn which burns you can live with. Then one morning, she got a message from the company's liaison officer. Just a single line. State Department review cleared. Commendation approved. Optional participation in after-action interview. She deleted it. Didn't need a commendation. She didn't need a medal or a thank you or another mission. She'd already earned what she came for, the silence of her own conscience. But even that wasn't always quiet. Sometimes she'd walk by her rifle case and pause, fingertips brushing the latch. The weapon was clean, oiled, ready. She told herself it was just habit, that she liked knowing it was in good condition. But part of her knew it was more than that. The rifle was a piece of who she was, the part she wasn't ready to let go of. On Sundays, she'd drive out to a small range in the woods, far from the main road. No one else ever showed up that early. She'd set up her mat, lay prone, and line up her M40. The rifle felt right in her hands, familiar weight, perfect balance. Through the scope, the world made sense again. Distance, wind, math. No politics, no noise, just breath and precision. The crack of the rifle echoed across the trees, sharp and clean. A perfect shot. She smiled just a little and whispered to herself, "Still got it." It wasn't pride, it was proof she hadn't lost control. Control meant everything now. That evening she got an unexpected call. A familiar voice, rough, cautious. She recognized immediately. "Yeah," she said, "it's me." "You been good." "Define good." He laughed softly. "Fair enough, just checking in. The company's putting together a new extraction team for East Africa. They asked for recommendations. I gave them your name." "I'm not interested," she said. There was a pause. "Didn't think you would be, still figured I'd ask." Silence stretched between them. Rain started again outside. Finally he said quietly, "You know I was wrong about you." She didn't answer. "You saved every one of us out there," he added. "You didn't have to, but you did." Her throat tightened. "We all did what we had to." "Maybe," he said, "but not everyone does it for the right reasons." The line clicked dead. Sat there for a while, phone still in her hand. She thought about what he'd said, about right reasons, about the thin line between duty and redemption. Then she looked outside. the porch light reflecting off the rain, and thought about her grandfather again. His old words echoed in her head: "Patience will save your life, girl, but knowing when to move, that's what makes you alive." She whispered, "Yeah, Grandpa, I know." For the first time in weeks, she smiled. It wasn't joy, it wasn't relief, it was something deeper, acceptance maybe. That night she slept without dreaming. When morning came, she ran farther than she had in months, 12 miles, through mist and pine and rising sun. Every step was quiet, steady, alive. And when she stopped, standing at the edge of a field as the light hit the horizon, she felt something she hadn't in a long time. Stillness. It wasn't peace exactly, but it was close. She took a deep breath, wiped the sweat from her face, and looked up. Somewhere far away, another mission was unfolding. Another ridge, another storm, another young soldier about to learn what patience costs. But not her, not anymore. She paid her price. And sometimes that was enough. How long could she keep pretending she was fine? Asked herself that question every morning now, somewhere between her first sip of coffee and the sound of the sun breaking through the trees. She'd been home for almost 3 months. The days all looked the same, steady, quiet, measured. And maybe that's what made them dangerous. Stillness could hide 1,000 fractures. The jungle had been chaos, loud, sharp, raw. This was worse. Silence had edges too. You just didn't see them until you bled on them. She still ran every morning, still worked her quiet job, still checked her rifle on Sundays. The world around her moved at a normal pace, but inside she was running on a different clock, one that never reset. Sometimes during her runs she'd catch herself scanning rooftops or tree lines out of instinct. Other times she'd wake up before dawn, heart racing, convinced she'd missed a radio call. Her phone would glow on the nightstand. No signal. No mission, just her. And yet, every now and then, she'd feel that old pulse of purpose, faint but real, like a heartbeat echoing from another life. It came back strongest the day a letter arrived. Not a government one, no seals, no stamps from D.C., just a plain white envelope, postmarked from California. The handwriting was neat but hesitant, like whoever wrote it wasn't sure if they should. She stood by the mailbox for a long time before opening it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "Staff Sergeant, you don't know me. My name is Daniel. I was one of the engineers your team extracted from. They told us later what you did, about the ridge, about the cover fire. I don't know what would happen if you hadn't been there, but I know what didn't. We didn't die. I have a daughter now. Her name's. I wanted you to know that she exists because of you. Thank you doesn't seem big enough, but it's all I have. I hope you're finding peace." They read it twice, then a third time. Her fingers shook slightly as she folded it back into the envelope. She sat on the porch for nearly an hour, just holding it, staring at the trees. Peace. He hoped she'd found peace. She almost laughed. The kind of quiet, bitter laugh that catches in your throat. Peace wasn't something you found. It was something you earned, and she wasn't sure she'd done enough yet to deserve it. That night she didn't dream about the jungle. She dreamed about the letter, about a child she'd never meet, laughing somewhere far away. And for once the dream didn't end with gunfire, just sunlight. In the morning she took the letter out again and pinned it to the inside of her locker, the one where she kept her rifle, her old dog tags, and her grandfather's Remington patch from the ranch. It didn't look like much, but it grounded her, reminded her that sometimes surviving wasn't the same as escaping, but it was a start. That afternoon, she decided to drive to the coast. She hadn't seen the ocean since before the mission. The water had always been her way of resetting, endless horizon, steady rhythm, something bigger than herself. The drive took an hour. The sun hung low, orange and soft, bleeding into the sea. She parked her truck, left her shoes in the cab, and walked barefoot across the sand. The wind carried the smell of salt and rain. Each step left a print that vanished with the tide. She liked that, the impermanence of it. She sat down on a rock near the waterline, watching waves break in slow motion. For the first time in months, her mind didn't race. The sea had a way of silencing everything that didn't matter. Until a voice broke the quiet. "Didn't think I'd find you here." She turned, stood a few yards away, jacket half-zipped, hands in his pockets. His hair was longer now, streaked with gray at the temples. He looked tired, not combat tired, just life tired. She raised an eyebrow. "You following me, Captain?" "Not my style," he said. "Company sent me east for a meeting. Figured I'd check in while I was here." She didn't respond right away. The sound of waves filled the gap between them. He sat down on a rock beside her, staring out at the horizon. "It's quiet," he said after a while. "That's the point." He nodded. "I get it. You know, after I used to sit on rooftops just to listen to nothing. Took me years to stop needing it." She glanced at him. "Did you?" He smiled faintly. "Mostly." They sat there in silence for a bit, two people who'd seen too much, saying everything without saying much at all. Finally he said, "You ever think about going back?" "Back where?" "Anywhere that isn't here." Looked at the water. "No, not really." He studied her for a moment. "You know, most people who done what you did, they either run from it or chase it. You seem to be doing neither." "I'm just existing," she said, "one day at a time." "That's harder than people think." She didn't answer. After a moment he pulled something from his jacket pocket, a small metal challenge coin. The unit insignia from the operation. Worn, scratched, heavy with history. He held it out to her. "You earned this. You were the reason any of us walked out." She stared at it. "I don't need souvenirs." "It's not a souvenir," he said. "It's a reminder." She hesitated, then took it. The metal was cold in her hand. "Thanks," she said quietly. He stood, brushed sand off his pants. "You ever want to come back to the field, I'll make the call. But something tells me you've got a different mission now." "What mission, that?" "Figuring out how to live with yourself." She looked away, back toward the horizon. "Yeah, that one's still in progress." He smiled softly. "It always is." When he left, she stayed until the sun disappeared. The coin rested in her palm the whole time. It caught the last light just before dusk swallowed it. That night, when she got home, she placed it next to the letter in her locker. Two pieces of metal and paper. Two reminders of who she'd been and who she might still become. Over the next weeks, things began to shift, not dramatically but quietly. She started volunteering at a veterans training range outside of town, not for pay, just to help, teaching new recruits about wind calls, shooting posture, how to breathe under pressure. Most of them were kids, eager, loud, invincible in their own heads. She saw herself in them sometimes, the version of her that believed skill alone could save you. "Patience," she'd tell them. "It's not about waiting, it's about knowing when to move." They'd nod, half listening, half dreaming about glory. That was fine. Lessons like that didn't land until the world tested you. After class, she'd stay behind, packing up brass casings one by one, breathing in the familiar smell of gunpowder and earth. It wasn't the jungle, but it was close enough to remind her who she was, and far enough to remind her why she'd left. One afternoon, one of the younger shooters, a nervous kid named, approached her. "Ma'am," he said, voice awkward but sincere, "they say you used to be out there, for real. Is that true?" She looked at him, unsure how to answer. Then she said simply, "Yeah, for real." "What's it like?" he asked. She thought about that, about mud and rain, and the sound of men shouting over dying radios, about fear and patience, and the split second between action and regret. "It's complicated," she said finally. "It'll show you who you really are, but it won't let you forget afterward." He nodded as if that made sense to him, even though it probably didn't. "You ever miss it?" looked out toward the trees where wind rustled the leaves. Sometimes, but not the way you think. How that? I missed the part where everything mattered. He fell silent, unsure how to respond. She gave him a small, understanding smile. You'll understand one day. As he walked off, she turned her gaze to the horizon again, that endless line where earth met sky. Somewhere out there, the jungle still breathed, indifferent and eternal. But it didn't own her anymore. That night she sat on her porch, listening to crickets. The coin and the letter sat on the table beside her. She whispered softly, "You did what you had to." It wasn't justification, it was truth, a quiet one. And sometimes, truth is the only thing that keeps you steady when the world you lived in no longer exists. She leaned back, let the night wrap around her, and for the first time since the mission, she didn't feel like she was waiting for something to go wrong. Maybe this was peace, not the kind the world gives you, but the kind you build yourself, one breath at a time. The kind that doesn't erase the past, but learns to live beside it. Why did peace feel heavier than war? Had asked herself that question 1,000 times. Peace was supposed to be calm, simple, but for her it felt like carrying invisible armor through a world that didn't need it. People said recovery was about moving on. They never said what to do when the part of you that fought to survive doesn't know how to stop. The morning still came early. The run still burned through her lungs. The silence still pressed on her chest, sometimes like humidity. But something was changing. Not fast, not dramatic, more like a slow thaw after winter. Maybe it started the day she caught the rookie at the range, missing every target he aimed at. He was trying too hard, shoulders locked, breath ragged. The more he missed, the angrier he got. She watched quietly for a while, remembering herself at 19 just as stubborn, just as sure that skill was enough to beat emotion. Finally, she walked up beside him. "Breathe," she said. "I am," he muttered. "No," she corrected gently. "You're thinking about breathing. There's a difference." He looked at her, confused. She knelt beside him, adjusted his grip, lowered his shoulder tension. "Wind's coming from the left. You're overcompensating. You can't control the wind, you just read it. Respect it." He blinked. "Respect the wind." Smiled faintly. "The wind doesn't care what you want. You just work with what it gives you." He fired again. The shot hit the outer ring of the target. She nodded. "Better." He looked at her, half grinning now. "You sound like a poet, not a sniper." "Some days they're the same thing," she said quietly. He laughed, and for a moment she did too. Just a soft exhale of amusement that didn't feel foreign anymore. When the range emptied, she stayed behind as usual, cleaning rifles, collecting brass. The smell of oil and dust filled the air. She liked that smell. It reminded her of order, of things that could be controlled, unlike memory. Lingered by the door. "You ever get tired of teaching?" he asked. "No," she said. "I get tired of people who don't listen." He smiled, then hesitated. "You're really good at this, you know. I mean, not just the shooting. The explaining makes sense when you say it." She looked up at him, surprised by the sincerity. "Thanks," she said. "Just trying to make sure someone learns the easy way." "The easy way?" he asked. His eyes darkened slightly. "Yeah, the one that doesn't cost you people you care about." He didn't press further. Some silences were earned. That evening, as she drove home, the sun dipped low over the pines, and for once the road ahead didn't feel endless. It just felt open. A few days later, she received another envelope, same handwriting as before. "Daniel." She opened it carefully. "Staff Sergeant. I hope you don't mind me writing again. I wasn't sure if the first letter reached you. I thought you'd want to know my daughter just started kindergarten. She's curious about everything, brave in ways I don't remember being. Sometimes I think about that night in the jungle. I don't remember much, just noise, fear, confusion. But I remember looking up once through the rain and seeing someone on the ridge. You. You probably didn't see us. You were too far, but that image never left me. You standing alone, fighting for people you didn't even know. It changed how I think about courage. If you're ever in California, there's a seat at our table. Always. They. She read it slowly, eyes lingering on the last line. A seat at our table. It hit her harder than she expected. Not because of the invitation, but because she realized how long it had been since she'd been offered a seat anywhere. For years, she'd lived like a shadow, useful, invisible, detached. She learned to exist without belonging. And maybe, she thought, that's what surviving does. It teaches you how to stay alive, not how to live. That night she took out the letter, the coin from, and her old dope card from the jungle, the one still smudged with rain stains. She laid them side by side on her table, 3 fragments of a life she'd been trying to stitch back together. She stared at them for a long time, then whispered softly, "You made it, don't waste it." The next morning, she drove to a small community college near Jacksonville, not for herself, for others. They asked her to speak to a group of veterans transitioning out of service. She refused the first few times they asked. Public speaking wasn't her thing, but this time she said yes. The classroom smelled faintly of chalk and coffee. About 20 people sat scattered through the rows, young, old, all with that same quiet alertness in their eyes. The look of people who've seen too much but talked too little. The coordinator introduced her briefly, then stepped aside. Stood at the front, hands in her jacket pockets, no notes, no script. She looked around, met a few eyes, then said simply, "They told me to talk about transition, how to go from there to here." A few heads nodded. She took a slow breath. "Here's the truth, you don't. Not really, you carry it with you. The noise, the discipline, the guilt, the pride. You just learn how to live with the weight instead of under it." Someone in the back asked, "Does it ever get easier?" She thought about that for a moment, then shook her head. "No, but it gets quieter." They listened closely, not because her words were polished, but because they were raw, real. She went on, "Everyone talks about strength like it's about who can push the hardest, but sometimes strength is just staying soft in a world that keeps trying to harden you. Don't lose that." A long pause followed. You could hear a pin drop. Then one by one, they started clapping. Didn't expect that. It wasn't the applause that mattered, it was what she saw in their eyes. Recognition, understanding, connection. After the session, a young woman approached her, former Army medic, quiet, polite. "Ma'am," she said, "I thought I was the only one who still couldn't sleep." Looked at her gently, "You're not." The woman's eyes welled slightly. "How do you deal with it?" Hesitated, then said softly, "I stopped trying to forget. I started trying to forgive." "Forgive who?" Looked out the window, sunlight catching in her eyes. "Myself." The medic nodded slowly, tears barely held back. "Thank you." Gave her a small smile. "You'll get there." That night sat outside her cabin again, the sky clear, stars sharp and endless. She wrapped herself in an old blanket and listened to the crickets hum. She thought about all the noise she used to crave, the mission chatter, the heartbeat of purpose, the constant alertness. Now she was learning to hear the quieter sounds, rain on leaves, wind through pine, her own breathing when it didn't hurt. The war hadn't left her, but it had changed shape. It was no longer something she fought against. It was something she carried carefully, respectfully, like a folded flag inside her chest. She closed her eyes and whispered the same words she'd told the medic. "I forgive you." She wasn't sure who she was saying it to. Maybe to the soldier who hesitated on her first shot. Maybe to the woman who never believed she belonged. Maybe to the part of herself that still woke up reaching for a rifle instead of a reason. Forgiveness wasn't peace, but it was closer than anything she'd found before. As dawn broke, painting the sky in faint pinks and golds, she realized something simple but powerful. She didn't need to prove herself anymore. Not to anyone, not even to herself. What she'd done in that jungle didn't define her. What she did after it did. And for the first time, that thought didn't scare her. It steadied her. She whispered softly to the sunrise. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. And that was enough. How do you know when you've healed enough to help again? Didn't you? But life has a way of answering questions you're not ready to ask. It started on a quiet Thursday morning. Fog hung low over the pines, thick enough to blur the road ahead as she drove toward the veterans' range. The radio played softly, an old Johnny Cash song she only half remembered. The world felt calm, unremarkable. Then she saw the truck. It was sideways across the two-lane highway, hazards flashing weakly. Another car had skidded off into the ditch. Slowed, scanning instinctively, scene assessment, automatic. Years of training never really left. She pulled over, stepped out, boots crunching on gravel. The air smelled of burnt rubber and wet asphalt. A man stood near the truck, dazed, hand pressed to his forehead. Blood streaked between his fingers. "You all right?" she called out. He looked up, blinking through shock. "Yeah, I think so. It all happened fast. There's a kid." Her stomach tightened. "Where?" He pointed toward the second car, nose buried in the ditch. Steam hissed from under the hood. "Didn't think," she ran. The driver's door was crushed inward. Inside, a young woman was slumped over the wheel, airbag deployed, blood trickling from a cut on her scalp. In the back seat, a small voice whimpered. "Mommy." His breath caught. "Hey," she said softly, crouching by the window. "It's okay, sweetheart. We're gonna get you out." The little girl, maybe 5 years old, had wide brown eyes, filled with tears but still alert. She was strapped into a booster seat, legs trembling. The front passenger door was jammed. Circled around, tried the rear door. Stuck. She braced her shoulder against it and pushed. Once. Twice. On the third hit, the frame gave just enough for her to wedge her fingers in and yank it open. "Hey, it's okay," she said, voice calm. "Can you unbuckle for me?" The girl nodded weakly. "Good, you're brave. Come on, I've got you." She lifted the child carefully, keeping her head low, checking for injuries, no fractures, just shock. The little one clung to her neck, trembling. Carried her to the side of the road, wrapped her jacket around her shoulders. "Stay right here, okay? I'll check on your mom." "Is she okay?" Hesitated, then said gently, "She will be." She ran back to the car. The woman was breathing, shallow but steady. No spinal deformity, pulse strong. Found her phone on the seat, called emergency services, relayed coordinates with military precision, clear, concise, calm. When the paramedics arrived, they took over fast. Briefed them, then stepped back, letting the professionals work. The little girl still sat where had left her, clutching the jacket tightly. When she saw her mother being lifted onto the stretcher, she started to cry. Crouched beside her again. "Hey, look at me." The child sniffled, eyes wide. "You did great," said softly. "You were really brave today." The girl nodded slowly. One of the EMTs glanced over. "She yours?" Shook her head. "No, just happened to be here." The medic nodded in respect. "Good timing." Smiled faintly. "Yeah, guess so." When the ambulances pulled away, she stayed a moment longer, watching the lights disappear into the fog. Her hands were steady, but her heart was racing. The smell of smoke, the adrenaline, it all felt familiar. Too familiar. She leaned against her truck, exhaled deeply. She hadn't felt that kind of focus in years. The clarity that comes when the world narrows to one task, one life, one choice. And for the first time, it hadn't come with gunfire. It had come with saving instead of shooting. That realization hit her harder than the moment itself. She climbed into her truck, sat there for a long while, staring at her hands. The same hands that had once pulled a trigger now held a child. The same instincts that had taken life had just preserved it. Maybe, she thought, redemption doesn't arrive with ceremony. Maybe it just shows up quietly one morning, wearing the face of a frightened little girl. That night she couldn't sleep, not because of nightmares, but because of something different. Her mind replayed the scene again and again, but this time it didn't feel heavy. It felt right. She sat on the porch with coffee, moonlight cutting through the trees, and whispered softly, maybe it wasn't all for nothing. For years she'd thought the only thing war had given her was loss, but maybe it had also given her clarity, the ability to stay calm when others couldn't, to move when others froze, to choose courage even when afraid. And maybe that was worth something. The next morning, she found an email in her inbox from the local sheriff's office, forwarded from the paramedics. "Ma'am, the family from yesterday asked us to thank you personally. The mother's stable. The little girl keeps asking about the lady with the jacket. If you're comfortable, they'd like to meet you when she's released." Deputy Collins stared at the message for a long time. Then she typed back, "Tell them I'll stop by." A week later, she stood in the hospital room doorway, unsure if she belonged there. The woman, pale but recovering, looked up and smiled weakly. "You must be," she said. Nodded, "just did what anyone would done." "Not everyone would done it like you," the woman said softly. The little girl sat beside the bed, clutching a stuffed animal. When she saw, her face lit up. "You came." Smiled, "Told you your mom would be okay." The girl nodded solemnly, "You're a hero." The words hit like a soft punch. Crouched beside her, "No, sweetheart, heroes are people who keep going even when they're scared. That was you." The girl's eyes sparkled, "Can I keep your jacket?" Laughed quietly, "You already have." The mother smiled, "We'll take good care of it." For the first time in a long time, felt something open in her chest, not pain, not guilt, but warmth. The kind that comes from being seen, not for what you did, but for what you became. As she left the hospital, the sun was setting over the parking lot, painting the world gold. She stopped at the entrance, looked up, and whispered to herself, "You did good." In the weeks that followed, things felt lighter. She still had her scars, still had her quiet moments, but they weren't weights anymore. They were reminders. She started helping more at the range, mentoring not just shooters but veterans struggling to adjust, men and women who carried their own jungles inside. She didn't preach. She just listened. One afternoon, she found sitting alone on the bench outside the training shed, staring at the ground. "Bad day?" she asked. He shrugged. "Worse week. My brother's unit got hit overseas. He's okay, but," he trailed off, "it just brings stuff back, you know." Nodded slowly. "Yeah, I do." He looked up. "How do you deal with it, the fear?" She thought about it, then said softly, "You don't get rid of it. You just make it part of the rhythm. Fear keeps you aware, but it doesn't get to steer anymore." He stared at her like he wanted to believe that. "You think it ever really goes away?" Smiled faintly. "I hope not. It's proof you're still human." He exhaled slowly, shoulders relaxing. "You should teach more often." She chuckled. "That's the plan." That night she sat on her porch again, same stars, same air, same quiet cabin. But something inside her had shifted. She took out the letter from Daniel, the coin from, and a new photo the hospital had mailed her, the little girl holding's old jacket, smiling in the sunlight. 3 tokens of 3 worlds, what she'd done, what she'd endured, what she'd become. She arranged them neatly on the table, looked at them for a long moment, and felt tears sting her eyes, not of sorrow, but gratitude. For survival. For purpose. For the chance to rewrite her story without firing another shot. She raised her coffee mug in a quiet salute to the night sky. "To the ones who never came home," she whispered, "and to the ones still trying to." The wind moved softly through the trees, carrying her words into the dark. And in that moment, finally understood what her grandfather had meant all those years ago. Patience doesn't just save your life. It teaches you how to live it afterward. How do you measure a life? By medals, by missions, by how many times you walked away. Used to think it was about endurance, the ability to take pain and keep moving. But now, sitting on the back porch of her small North Carolina cabin as dawn rose over the trees, she knew better. Endurance keeps you alive. Grace keeps you human. The air smelled of rain-soaked pine. Steam lifted from the earth as sunlight broke through the morning fog. It had been a full year since the jungle, 12 months of learning how to live in quiet again. In that time, she hadn't gone back to the field, hadn't picked up another contract. She'd found other missions instead, smaller, quieter ones, teaching at the range, mentoring younger veterans, fixing fences for her elderly neighbor. Saving a life once had felt like redemption. Helping others live theirs felt like peace. She sipped her coffee, eyes tracing the horizon. Her phone buzzed on the table beside her, a text from. Scored 95 on the precision test today. Think you'd be proud. She smiled faintly and typed back. Pride's not the goal, patience is, but yeah, I'm proud. He replied with a laughing emoji and a photo, his range target, center shots tight and perfect. She chuckled softly, shaking her head. The younger generation had new tools, new slang, new ways of finding meaning. But the fundamentals never changed: focus, breath, timing. Life, like shooting, was always about knowing when to move. She stood, stretching her back. Her scars pulled faintly against her skin, reminders that healing doesn't mean erasing. It means living with what remains. Inside, the envelope from Daniel sat framed on the mantel now, beside a photo of her grandfather and his old Remington. The letter wasn't about gratitude anymore. It was about continuity, proof that what she did mattered, even if no one else knew it. And she decided that was enough. Later that afternoon, drove into town. The community college had invited her back, not to talk about combat this time, but about resilience. The flyer called it after the uniform, Finding Purpose Beyond the Fight. The title made her uneasy. Purpose was a word that people loved to use but rarely understood. Still, she agreed to speak. Not because she wanted attention, but because she knew how many of them were where she'd once been, stuck between survival and living. The small auditorium smelled faintly of dust and new carpet. Maybe 30 people sat scattered through the seats, a mix of veterans, students, and a few civilians who'd just come to listen. When walked to the podium, she didn't bring notes. She never did. She spoke the way she'd learned to shoot, by trusting instinct and breathing through the noise. I used to think survival was the finish line, she began. That if you made it out, you'd already won. But that's not true. She paused, scanning the room. Survival's just the first step. The real battle starts when everything goes quiet, when there's no mission left to tell you who you are. A few heads nodded. She caught the eyes of one older veteran in the front row, his hands trembling slightly, jaw tight. She knew that look. I won't tell you it gets easy, she continued. It doesn't, but it gets clearer. You start realizing that the world doesn't owe you peace. You have to make it yourself. Someone asked how. Smiled faintly. Start by forgiving yourself for surviving. That's the hardest part. The room went silent. Even the hum of the air conditioner seemed to fade. She went on, voice soft but steady. We all carry ghosts. You can't outrun them, but you can learn to walk beside them, to let them remind you, not define you. When she finished, no one clapped right away. They just sat there, quiet, reflecting. Then the applause came, slow, respectful, real. Afterward, people lined up to talk to her. Some thanked her. Others just shook her hand without words. The older man from the front row stopped before leaving. Ma'am, he said quietly, I've been trying to sleep for 10 years. Tonight might be the first time I do. His throat tightened. She simply nodded. Then it was worth it. That evening, she drove to the coast again, the same stretch of sand where she'd met months before. The sky burned gold over the water. Waves rolled slow and rhythmic, like breathing. She walked barefoot along the shoreline, hands in her pockets, boots dangling from two fingers. The horizon stretched forever, endless and calm. For the first time, the sea didn't remind her of isolation. It reminded her of continuity. Every wave that broke returned eventually. The rhythm of life, departure and return, loss and renewal. She stopped at the edge of the surf and closed her eyes. She could still hear echoes of the jungle sometimes, rain against leaves, the thud of distant gunfire, the crack of her rifle in the storm. But those memories no longer felt like wounds. They felt like scars, closed, honest, earned. A child's laugh carried faintly from down the beach, light, unguarded, opened her eyes. A young girl was running through the shallow water, chasing a kite that danced against the wind. Her mother stood nearby, smiling, calling out reminders to stay close. His chest tightened. For a moment, she thought of the little girl who existed because of one long night in a place no one wanted to remember. She smiled softly, whispered into the wind, "Stay brave, kid." The kite climbed higher. As the sun dipped lower, sat on the sand, knees drawn up, the surf touching her boots. The sky deepened into orange and violet, clouds glowing faintly at the edges. She thought about everything that had brought her here: Montana winters, Marine Corps grit, the jungle's fire, and the long, quiet war that followed inside her own head. Every chapter had tried to teach her something: patience, discipline, compassion, forgiveness. But the lesson that mattered most was the one no one ever told her, that healing isn't about going back to who you were. It's about honoring who you became when everything broke. She whispered the words aloud, tasting them in the salt air. You can't rebuild the person who went into the storm. You just learn to live as the one who came out. The ocean answered with another wave, washing over her footprints, erasing them gently. And she understood erasure wasn't loss, it was renewal. When she drove home that night, the stars were out in full force, brilliant, endless. She parked in her driveway, turned off the engine, and just sat there for a moment, listening to the crickets sing. Inside, her mantle glowed softly in the lamplight. The letter, the coin, the photo. 3 small artifacts, 3 different kinds of courage. She touched each one before sitting down at her desk. Then, almost without thinking, she began to write, not a report, not a confession, just a story. About a woman who was told she couldn't carry her weight. Who did it anyway? About the jungle that tried to break her. And the silence that taught her how to rebuild. The pen moved easily, steadily. Words flowed like breath, not perfect but true. When she finished, she leaned back, reading the final line she'd written. Sometimes the battle isn't about who fires first. It's about who refuses to stop fighting when no one's watching. She set the pen down, exhaled and smiled. The story wasn't for anyone else. It was for her. To remind herself that dignity doesn't shout and courage doesn't always wear a uniform. Sometimes it just wakes up early, ties its boots, and keeps living quietly, one honest day at a time. Outside, the wind shifted, brushing through the trees. Rain started again, soft, rhythmic, familiar. But this time it didn't sound like war. It sounded like home. And as closed her eyes, the last thought that came to her wasn't of battle or loss or ghosts. It was simple, steady, free. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. The end.